It always begins with a secret, but Charlotte Hawthorne didn't expect hers to return with a funeral. The morning Lord Edmund was buried, the rain seemed never-ending. A grey curtain pulled across the Cotswolds. Even the ancient yew trees drooped, their limbs heavy with mist. Charlotte stood apart from the other mourners, if you could call 3 people a crowd. Her dark coat soaked, hair plastered to her cheek, camera slung forgotten across her chest. The priest's words were little more than a hush in the drizzle, and when the last shovelful of earth was tamped down, the gravedigger barely looked at her before shuffling off to the warmth of his van. It was a funeral done quickly, almost secretively. No eulogy, no long speeches, just the wet slap of mud and the hollow ache of absence. As she walked back toward Hawthorne Grange, the manor that had raised her and nearly broken her, Charlotte felt an old anxiety creeping into her bones. She hadn't been home in years. London had swallowed her. Fashion shoots, the blur of city lights, the stubborn belief that she could outpace the ghosts of her family. But now, forced back by a terse phone call and the too swift death of her uncle, she was already questioning why she ever thought she could outrun this place. The Grange appeared through the fog like a memory, stone walls crusted in ivy, windows reflecting only pale light, as if the house itself mourned. Charlotte paused at the threshold, gathering herself, then pushed inside. The house felt both too large and too small, the silence almost suffocating, broken only by the faint ticking of the hall clock. She wandered through dim corridors until the kitchen clock chimed, reminding her it was barely dawn, then let herself out onto the back steps to clear her mind. That was when she saw it, a small, sturdy Exmoor pony, mane wild and tangled, standing as if conjured from the mist at the edge of the apple orchard. Charlotte froze. The animal was out of place, skittish but watching her intently, nostrils flaring, legs taut. There was something almost knowing in its eyes. Her camera instinct kicked in, but before she could lift the lens, the pony tossed its head and bolted toward the far hedge. Charlotte hesitated only a second before giving chase, adrenaline buzzing. The grass soaked her shoes, her breath sharp in the cold air as she followed the pony's trail through dew and brambles. It was like being pulled by memory, a game she'd played with her father as a child, chasing shadows through the fields. The pony led her past the old orchard, through a gap in the crumbling stone wall, down a narrow path veiled with mist. The world grew quieter, sounds muffled. Charlotte's heart hammered, both from exertion and the uncanny sense that she was walking into something carefully staged. The path ended at the gatehouse, a squat structure that had once marked the estate's entrance but now slumped in decay. Windows boarded, door askew, ivy choking the gutters. The pony waited a few yards off, stamping its hooves, then melted into the undergrowth. Charlotte approached warily. Something about the silence pressed against her, a hush loaded with old secrets. She pushed open the sagging door, hinges screeching, revealing a tangle of shadows, the damp air tinged with rot and forgotten memories. Her eyes adjusted, picking out the shapes of old furniture, boxes stacked haphazardly, and, her breath caught, a wall crowded with photographs in tarnished frames. She stepped closer, heart racing, recognizing faces from another life. Her father as a young man, uniformed soldiers, stern women in Edwardian dress. One photo, her grandfather with a hand on a boundary marker, date faded but the royal crest visible. Her fingers brushed the frame. She could almost hear her father's voice, explaining the importance of land, the way history clings to stone. A sudden noise snapped her back. Hoofbeats outside, then the faint slam of a car door. Charlotte ducked behind a battered trunk just as headlights swept the interior, shadows leaping. Voices, muffled but urgent, filtered through the walls. "She's not supposed to be here." "Just scare her off," Grant said. Charlotte's breath froze in her throat. The sound of boots crunching on gravel, the sharp click of a flashlight. Someone rattled the gatehouse door, cursed, then moved off. She waited, nerves raw, counting each heartbeat. When silence returned, she crept to the window and peered through the crack. A black SUV idled at the drive, two men in dark jackets conferring, one glancing nervously toward the house. The SUV pulled away, tires spitting mud, vanishing into the mist. Charlotte sank to the floor, pulse hammering. The sense of unease from the funeral had morphed into something sharper. Danger, not just grief. She waited until her legs stopped trembling, then carefully snapped photos of the photographs and the strange tracks outside before slipping back toward the Grange, heart pounding at every sound. As she crossed the field, dawn began to break, the mist thinning, the air heavy with secrets. She glanced back once to where the pony had stood, only to find the grass empty, the hoof prints already fading. Charlotte pressed a hand to her camera, determination hardening inside her. Whatever had begun in the shadows of this land, she was in it now, chasing more than family ghosts. She was chasing the truth. The story, she knew, had only just begun. Let me know if you'd like to continue with part 2 or want any adjustments. The fog barely lifted as Charlotte made her way down the path again that afternoon, the memory of hoofbeats and that black SUV still echoing through her mind. Hawthorne Grange loomed behind her, a fortress of old secrets and new fears, while ahead, the ruined gatehouse stood small but stubborn against the slow decay of time. Charlotte had meant only to document the old photographs, maybe dig for a clue her uncle or grandfather left behind. But something in the encounter with those men, "Just scare her off," Grant said, had changed her plans. She needed answers. She needed to know who was willing to threaten her and why. Pushing open the battered door, Charlotte startled at the sight of someone inside. There, by the dusty window, stood a woman in her late 70s, tall despite her frail build, her silver hair pinned with military precision. Her coat hung on bony shoulders, boots caked with mud, but her eyes, sharp, gray, and unsparing, missed nothing. "You must be Charlotte Hawthorne," the woman said, voice clipped, British, but with the kind of authority that made Charlotte stand straighter. "Yes. How did you—" "Your father never could resist a photograph," the woman replied, almost smiling. "Or a cause." She gestured at the wall of faded images. "I'm Lady Eleanor Cavendish. This place, my family lived here before the Hawthorns. Now I'm the last one left, or so it seems. Come in, close the door behind you. There are always ears in the mist." Charlotte obeyed, both wary and oddly comforted. The gatehouse was cluttered but not neglected. On a rickety table, teacups, a silver flask, and a stack of letters in trembling handwriting. On the wall, those photos, soldiers in World War uniforms, children holding lambs, stern matriarchs in black lace. Among them, Charlotte's father, a much younger man, arm slung around Eleanor's shoulder. "You knew my father?" Charlotte asked, her voice tight. Eleanor nodded, fingers brushing a photo's edge. "He was a good man, and stubborn like you. He was always poking into business the council wanted forgotten." Her gaze was heavy. "And your Uncle Edmund. He came here too, often. They were working together. Something about the land. Boundaries, rights, common use. That's what started the trouble. Charlotte's chest tightened. He died suddenly. No warning. They said it was a stroke, but they always say that, Eleanor interrupted, voice low and cold. When someone gets too close to the truth, it's always an accident, or an illness, or simply bad luck. A gust rattled the window. Charlotte shivered, though she was certain it wasn't the cold. I found old letters, maps. My father wrote about land being stolen, markers moved. Do you know what he meant? Eleanor glanced over her shoulder, then crossed to the window, pulling the curtain aside just a crack. He was right. The council, Sir Ashford, they've been shifting boundaries for years. Small pieces at first. Just a meter here or there, then bigger chunks. Records go missing, stones get dug up. New fences appear overnight. When your grandfather tried to stop it, he ended up dead. She paused, letting the words hang. The land is worth more than money here. It's power. Whoever controls it, controls the future. Charlotte fumbled for her notebook, hands trembling. Who else knows? Not many brave enough to say so out loud. Your uncle tried to take it to the Ministry of Justice. He was gathering evidence, old deeds, maps, sworn statements. Last I heard, he was meeting someone from London. Next day, he was gone. Charlotte's mind raced. Do you know where he kept the evidence? Eleanor shook her head. He was careful, trusted few. But I know this much. He was going to send it to Rosa Field at the National Library if anything happened. He trusted her. So did your father. Charlotte barely had time to process before the crunch of gravel sent both women's eyes to the window. A black SUV rolled up, engine idling, the same vehicle from before. The passenger window rolled down. Grant, sunglasses, angular jaw, the kind of face made for intimidation, stared directly at the gatehouse. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. That's Grant, Ashford's man. He does the dirty work. Don't let him see you're scared. They only respect strength. Charlotte's pulse hammered as she watched the SUV idle. For a moment, it looked as if Grant might get out, but after a long stare, he simply pointed a finger toward the gatehouse, then made a slow, deliberate cut across his throat before rolling up the window. The SUV reversed, spinning gravel, and sped off toward the main road. The silence that followed was thick. Charlotte found herself shaking, adrenaline sharp in her veins. Eleanor handed her a faded envelope. I was saving this for the right time. Your father left it for you, after one of his last visits. Take it. And if you're wise, you'll be gone before sundown. But Charlotte couldn't leave. Not now. Not when the lines between past and present were blurring, when threats hung heavy in the air, and when her family's honor, her very sense of self, was tangled in every stone and shadow of this land. She took the envelope and squeezed Eleanor's hand, a silent vow passing between them. I'm not giving up. I promise you that. As she made her way back to Hawthorne Grange, Charlotte's thoughts raced. The fight wasn't just about boundaries. It was about truth, about justice, about refusing to let fear silence her family's story. She clutched the envelope tight, not yet daring to open it, and looked back only once. Eleanor stood in the doorway, straight and proud, watching Charlotte go. The mist was lifting just a little, and Charlotte felt a glimmer of something like hope, fierce, defiant, and impossible to ignore. The storm was coming, but she was ready to face it. Rain hammered down as Charlotte reached the village clinic with Eleanor, every puddle reflecting the churn of her mind. Grant's cold warning, the envelope burning a hole in her pocket, and the unanswered questions clinging to every memory. The clinic, modest and a little battered by years of wind and drizzle, glowed with a yellow warmth in the gloom. Inside, the scent of antiseptic warred with old flowers, and the metallic tang of tea left too long to steep. It was the sort of place where people whispered confessions as much as ailments. Dr. Sinclair, lean and alert in his white coat, glanced up as Charlotte guided Eleanor through the door. He smiled in greeting, his eyes lingering on Eleanor's drawn face. "Let's get you inside, Lady Cavendish," he said gently, already helping her out of her coat and into a chair. "The wind's fierce tonight." His hands were careful, his tone more familiar than formal, and Charlotte felt a faint flicker of gratitude. At least here, they were safe for a moment. Charlotte busied herself making tea while Dr. Sinclair checked Eleanor's vitals. He asked gentle questions about her breathing, her sleep, her heart. Eleanor answered with the stubborn dignity of someone who'd survived more than one kind of war. When she coughed, the doctor frowned, scribbled a note, and gave her medicine. "You're stronger than you look," he said quietly. In the waiting room, Charlotte caught sight of Roger Whitfield, an old family friend who had worked the estate lands for decades. Roger's face was weathered, with wind-chapped cheeks and a look that said he'd seen far too much. He tipped his cap as Charlotte approached, offering her a thin smile. "Your father would have hated this weather," he said, voice low and a little sad. "I think he'd have hated all of this," Charlotte replied, glancing down at the envelope still unopened in her pocket. She hesitated, then pulled it out. "Did you know he left this for me?" Roger's brows rose. "He trusted you, Charlotte. He always said the truth would come out, one way or another." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Before Edmund died, he was collecting old parish maps, deeds, anything showing the boundaries. He thought if he could get them to the Ministry of Justice, they'd have to act. He never got the chance. As if on cue, Lucy stormed through the clinic door, heels clicking on the tile, umbrella dripping at her side. She looked every inch the London professional, hair perfectly pinned, coat cinched, jaw set in a line Charlotte remembered from childhood arguments. "Mother!" she called, striding over to Eleanor and kneeling at her side. "Are you all right? What happened?" Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand. "I'm fine, Lucy. It's just the usual. Dr. Sinclair's looking after me." She paused, then added with a wry smile, "Your sister's been looking after me, too." Lucy shot Charlotte a look, half exasperation and half relief. "When I got your message, I took the first train out. I couldn't just—" Her voice cracked, and she shook her head. "Never mind. I'm here now." Charlotte was too tired to argue. She handed Lucy the envelope. "Dad left this. I haven't opened it yet." The sisters sat side by side on a battered couch as Lucy carefully unfolded the letter inside. The paper was yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but legible. Charlotte read over Lucy's shoulder, heart thudding with every line. "Charlotte, if you're reading this, I suppose things have gone wrong. Trust Roger. Trust Eleanor. There are old maps, originals, hidden in the gatehouse and in the library. The official records are being changed, piece by piece. If anything happens to me or Edmund, send what you find to Rosa Field at the National Library. She'll know what to do. The truth matters, even if the cost is high. Don't let them take what isn't theirs. Love, Dad." Charlotte looked up, her vision blurry. Lucy squeezed her shoulder. "We'll do what he says. We'll find the originals, and we'll make sure everyone knows." Roger nodded, glancing toward the rain-lashed window. "There's more," he said softly. "Edmund gave me copies of some old maps, said to hide them in case anything happened. They show the boundary stones before the changes. I've kept them safe, but they need to be digitized, sent to someone who can't be threatened." Lucy straightened. "All business. I'll scan everything. We'll make backups, cloud storage, encrypted drives, the works." She tapped her phone, already pulling up contacts. "And I'll send them to Rosa tonight." The rest of the evening blurred with activity. Dr. Sinclair checked on Eleanor, promising to falsify paperwork if anyone tried to move her from the clinic. Lucy set up her laptop and scanner on the nurse's desk, uploading every document and map Roger produced. Charlotte photographed everything with her camera, cataloging files by date, by hand, just as her father would have done. Eleanor told stories in a low voice, about the war, about her own father's refusal to bow to bullies, about how land was more than earth. It was memory and dignity. Near midnight, Charlotte slipped outside for air. The storm had passed, leaving the village washed clean, streetlights flickering in puddles. She saw across the road the outline of the Exmoor pony grazing quietly beneath an ash tree, its presence grounding and strange. She watched it for a long moment, the chill wind tugging at her coat, before returning inside, her resolve hardening. They had made a start, but danger was circling closer. She could feel it, like the promise of more rain, heavy on the horizon. Inside, Lucy was uploading the last file, and Eleanor was finally asleep, her breathing steady. Roger handed Charlotte a flash drive. "If you need to run, take this, and don't look back." Charlotte nodded. The fight for her family's name, her village's memory, was no longer a lonely one. They were together now, sheltering beneath the leaking roof of the clinic, but armed with truth, and the stubborn, shared hope that somewhere justice still mattered. Outside, the night pressed close, but the darkness didn't seem so absolute. Not anymore. Long after the clinic lights dimmed and the sound of rain faded to a distant whisper, Charlotte lay awake in the small upstairs room Dr. Sinclair had offered her for the night. Moonlight slipped through the thin curtains, catching on dust motes, painting the cracked ceiling with ghostly stripes. She could hear Eleanor's soft breathing from down the hall and the low murmur of Lucy's voice as she ended yet another late-night call to London. Sleep didn't come easily. Too many questions pressed in from all sides. The envelope from her father sitting unopened on the nightstand. The memory of Eleanor's warning echoing in her head. The land is worth more than money here. Its power. Charlotte finally gave up on sleep, sitting up and swinging her feet to the floor, the old boards creaking beneath her. She reached for the envelope and, after a moment's hesitation, broke the seal. The letter inside was brittle and stained, written in her father's hurried script, full of crossed-out words and smudged ink. She felt the weight of time as she unfolded it, as if she were trespassing on the rawest corners of his heart. "My dearest Charlotte," it began, "if you're reading this, I am either gone or in more trouble than I can solve on my own. I hope it's not the former. There are things you must know about our family, about this land, about what I've been fighting for. I am not crazy, though they'll tell you I am. Something is being taken from us, quietly, under cover of paperwork and shadows. The boundary stones have been moved, Charlotte. Parish maps altered. There's an old survey in the Grange library, 1972. Look behind the leather-bound ledgers, second shelf from the bottom. Richard, the caretaker, helped me hide it after that night by the mere." Charlotte's heart thudded. She read the next lines, his words jagged. Richard was right to be afraid. He saw men digging by lantern, heard voices that didn't belong to this place. When he pressed for answers, they found him in the canal, dead of accident. I pressed harder after, and so did Edmund. Now Edmund is gone. If you find this, find the survey. Trust Roger and Eleanor. The truth is still there, if you look. Don't let them erase us. Tears pricked Charlotte's eyes. She set the letter down, swallowing the ache of regret. She had spent so long avoiding this house, these memories, running from the guilt of not being able to save her father from his obsessions, or herself from the cold silence that followed his funeral. Now it felt as though every mile she'd put between herself and the Grange had only sharpened her responsibility to return. She dressed quickly, pulling on boots and a rain jacket, and crept downstairs. The Grange library loomed dark and heavy, shelves groaning under the weight of centuries. Dust rose with every step. She found the shelf her father had mentioned, hands trembling as she pulled away leather-bound books and finally uncovered a bundle of old papers tied with twine. Her breath caught as she unwrapped the bundle. Inside were maps, yellowed and cracked, their lines faint but unmistakable. She held up the oldest, Parish Boundary Survey, 1972. On the reverse, her grandfather's signature. Charlotte spread the maps across the desk, comparing them to the scanned copies Lucy had uploaded. The difference was subtle but damning, a 5-meter shift in the common boundary, enough to steal a chunk of land by stealth, a theft written into the history of the estate. Tucked inside was another slip of paper, a single diary page, the ink faded and blotted by water. Her grandfather's writing, June 1972. Something is wrong. The markers at Eastmere were moved. I confronted Ashford's men, denied everything, of course. Richard said he would watch tonight. I told him not to, but he insisted. The next morning, he was dead. Police ruled it an accident, but I can't believe it. If anything happens, Charlotte must know. The land is the family. Don't let them bury us in paperwork and lies. Charlotte stared at the words, the realization settling like a stone in her stomach. This was bigger than family pride. It was a campaign of erasure, slow and careful, covering every track except those that lived on in memory and hidden pages. A floorboard creaked behind her. Charlotte spun, heart in her throat, but it was Lucy, rubbing her eyes, hair a tangled halo. You couldn't sleep either, huh? Lucy whispered. Charlotte shook her head, voice thick. I found the survey, and a diary page. Granddad knew. Dad knew. Richard tried to warn them. They killed him for it. Lucy knelt beside her, scanning the pages. We have enough now to prove it, don't we? Charlotte nodded slowly. But it's not enough to prove it in court. We have to make it impossible for them to hide. That means digitizing everything, getting it to Rosa, to the National Library, to the press if we have to. We make so much noise they can't silence us. The sisters sat shoulder to shoulder, grief mingling with determination. For the first time, Charlotte saw how much she had missed Lucy, the way her practical, relentless energy made things possible that had once felt hopeless. They worked through the night, photographing every page, scanning every map. Charlotte made notes, cross-referencing locations, piecing together timelines. As dawn approached, Eleanor joined them, blanket around her shoulders. She didn't ask for an explanation, just put a hand on each of their backs. It's time you girls stopped running, she said quietly. This isn't just your family's story anymore. The whole village is waiting for someone to say what happened out loud. Charlotte looked at her, a rush of gratitude tightening her chest. We will. But we need you with us, Eleanor. People listen to you. Eleanor smiled, her gaze fierce. "I've never been afraid of telling the truth, darling, even when it hurt." Outside, the world was waking, soft light spilling over the hills. Charlotte tucked the diary page and the survey into a file, feeling the shape of something new growing in her chest. A hope that was part courage, part sorrow, and wholly necessary. They were done with guilt. The time for regret was over. Today would begin the real fight. For their father, for Richard, for the village, and for the land that remembered everything, even when people tried to forget. By the time dawn filtered through the kitchen window at Hawthorne Grange, the house felt transformed, charged with a fierce new purpose that had nothing to do with grief. Charlotte, Lucy, and Eleanor sat huddled over maps and faded documents spread across the breakfast table. Roger had dropped off a thermos of strong coffee and a quick word of encouragement before disappearing to his own chores. No one ate much. The mood was tense, focused. Every shuffle of paper, every keystroke was the sound of a plan taking shape. Lucy was the first to break the silence. "We need digital copies, everything. Originals can be destroyed, but once it's online and in the right hands, it can't just vanish." Her phone chimed. A message from Rosa Field at the National Library, confirming receipt of the first files Lucy had sent during the night and offering secure upload links for the rest. "We'll send it all to Rosa, and, Mom, I need you to help me label these. You know the faces, the dates, the places." Eleanor nodded, her movements steady but eyes flashing with determination. "There are some old contact sheets in my dark room. They may have names written in pencil. Take whatever you need." For the next few hours, Charlotte photographed every page, every handwritten note and ink-stamped deed. Her camera's shutter a steady, urgent rhythm. Lucy scanned maps and letters, checking each file as it uploaded. Eleanor pointed out the key images. The parish survey of 1972, photos of the boundary marker before it was moved. Her own father standing beside the original stone. The three women moved as a unit, purpose making them efficient, the old distances between them dissolving as the work built momentum. Outside, the mist lifted to reveal a black SUV idling at the top of the drive. It was Blythe. Charlotte recognized the county crest on the car door, the unmistakable silhouette of authority hoping to intimidate by just being present. Within minutes, the SUV rolled down the gravel, stopping near the kitchen window. Charlotte's heart hammered as she heard the heavy tread of boots on the porch. A knock, sharp and official. Lucy motioned for everyone to stay calm and open the door herself. "Can I help you, officer?" she asked, polite but cold. Sheriff Blythe looked past her, gaze settling on Eleanor. "We've had a report of elder endangerment, Miss Hawthorne. Lady Cavendish is to be taken into protective custody while we verify her safety, and we need to speak to you about trespassing and alleged theft of county documents." Lucy didn't flinch. "My mother is under medical care. Dr. Sinclair will vouch for her. He's already filed the paperwork. As for the documents, we have every right to copies of anything that concerns our family land. Do you have a warrant?" Blythe shifted, caught off guard. "We'll get one if we have to, but you'll come with us now, Lady Cavendish." Charlotte saw Eleanor's hand tighten around the arm of her chair, but before anyone could move, Dr. Sinclair appeared, white coat flapping as he marched up the drive, a file in hand. "Sheriff, Lady Cavendish is not to be moved. She's my patient and has a medical exemption filed with the county. Any attempt to remove her without cause will be met with formal complaint to the NHS and the council. I suggest you focus on whoever set fire to the gatehouse last night, instead of harassing this family. The standoff was tense, seconds ticking by. Blythe's jaw clenched. Finally, he backed down, muttering, "We'll be watching." He returned to his SUV, slamming the door harder than necessary. Relief washed through the kitchen. Lucy hugged Eleanor, and even Charlotte allowed herself a small smile. Dr. Sinclair pulled up a chair. "They'll try again, but you bought yourself time. Now, what's your next move?" Roger returned mid-morning, a nervous energy in his step. "If you're ready, I'll drive these originals to Rosa's friend in London myself," he said, gesturing to the neatly bundled folders. "She'll keep them safe, and I'll call when I'm back." Charlotte pressed the documents into his hands, gratitude nearly choking her. "Be careful," she whispered. The day was a blur of copying and scanning, of double-checking email addresses and cloud folders, of whispered strategy over the kitchen table. They included not just the historic records, but phone videos of recent threats and the burned-out gatehouse, weaving a tapestry of evidence that would be hard for any official, local or national, to ignore. Late that afternoon, the police returned. This time, Dr. Sinclair met them at the gate, waving a new letter from the NHS and a statement from Lady Cavendish herself. The officers left, empty-handed and increasingly irritated, but Charlotte didn't relax. "They'll push harder," she muttered. "Ashford and Blythe aren't finished." But for now, the evidence was safe. Originals on their way to the capital, digital copies uploaded to secure drives, and backup images shared with trusted friends and distant journalists. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, it caught the three women sitting together in the parlor, exhaustion etched in every line of their faces, but also something new, a fragile, growing hope. That evening, as they ate dinner in the kitchen, Lucy's phone buzzed. She read the message and grinned. "Rosa has everything. She's already flagged it for the Serious Fraud Office and the Ordnance Survey, and she's sending a package to a reporter at The Guardian." Eleanor exhaled, her shoulders finally relaxing, and Charlotte felt the first true smile since the funeral flicker across her face. Outside, as dusk settled, Charlotte stepped onto the porch. In the long grass, the Exmoor pony stood watching, calm and solid as ever, like a silent witness to everything that had come before, and everything yet to unfold. For the first time, she didn't just see an omen, she saw a sign that the battle for memory and justice was truly beginning. Inside, her family was waiting, no longer running, no longer alone. The fight was far from over, but tonight, at least, they were ready for whatever came next. Rain lashed the windows all night, making the whole of Hawthorne Grange feel like a ship at sea, adrift, battered, but holding together because it must. Charlotte barely slept, her mind replaying every risk they'd taken. Blythe's threats, Dr. Sinclair's defiance, the precious evidence now scattering through the digital world. She woke to Lucy hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table, her face set in determined lines as the first pale light crept across the floor. "You were right about the construction site," Lucy said without looking up, voice hoarse from too little sleep and too much worry. "That's where everything leads. If there's anything left to find, something physical, they haven't destroyed, it'll be out there." Charlotte poured coffee, her hands still unsteady. "We can't just walk onto Ashford's golf course project and ask for a tour." Lucy's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. "No, but I brought something better than courage." She opened a case on the table and revealed a compact drone, sleek and black, with a camera mounted underneath. "Let's see how they like being the ones watched for once." By late morning, the sisters, bundled against the wet, made their way out along the lane to where the old common had been stripped bare and the new foundations for Ashford's luxury club now squatted on the land like a threat. It was all churned earth, steel fencing, and temporary lights that looked like prison towers even in daylight. They stayed hidden in the hedge as Lucy sent up the drone, the little machine humming into the low clouds, its camera streaming footage back to her tablet. For a long time, there was only mud and machinery. Charlotte's heart sank as she watched workers trudge across the site, none of them noticing a mossy patch near the edge of the woods. But as Lucy panned the camera lower, something caught Charlotte's eye. A chunk of old stone, half buried, carved with a crest and the date 1898. "There," Charlotte hissed, snapping photos of the tablet's feed. "That's the boundary marker. It survived!" Lucy's hands danced across the controls, circling the drone, zooming in for every detail. The location, the carved royal cipher, the way the earth around it had been disturbed but not yet completely covered. As the drone passed overhead, two workers glanced up, one pointing, but Lucy brought it higher, keeping them guessing. Charlotte's skin prickled with nervous excitement. This was it, the undeniable proof tying everything together. They had to get closer, in person, for measurements and real photos. That night, after darkness fell and most of the workers had left, Charlotte and Lucy crept back, flashlights in their pockets, gloves on their hands. The wind howled, scattering clouds across the moon, but they moved quickly, hearts pounding. They slipped through a gap in the fence, crawling behind stacked pallets until the marker was in sight. Larger than Charlotte remembered from the photos, its edges slick with rain. Charlotte knelt beside it, snapping picture after picture, laying a ruler along the face to show scale, her breath steaming in the cold. Lucy sketched the location on the site map, marking the GPS coordinates from her phone. "It's all here," Charlotte whispered, hope and terror knotted together. "If we get this to the authorities, there's no way they can claim ignorance." But then, a harsh voice echoed over the mud. "Oi, who's there?" Flashlights bobbed in the darkness. Lucy grabbed Charlotte's sleeve, yanking her behind a mound of earth. They crouched, holding their breath as two security guards trudged past, one cursing about bloody trespassers, the other kicking a stone in frustration. After what felt like an hour but could only have been minutes, the men wandered off, complaining about the rain. When the way was clear, the sisters scrambled back through the fence, running breathless through the field, laughing as adrenaline crashed through them. "That was insane," Lucy gasped, grinning despite the mud on her knees. "I feel like I'm in a spy movie." Charlotte shoved her lightly. "Welcome to Hawthorne Grange. We don't do boring." By the time they staggered back to the kitchen, soaked and exhausted, Eleanor was waiting, her face pale but her eyes shining with pride and fear. Charlotte showed her the photos, every detail crisp, every number in place. "It's all digitized, Mom. If they try to dig it up or move it again, we have them. And I've already sent everything to Rosa and to a lawyer in London." Eleanor took Charlotte's hand, voice trembling. "Your grandfather would be so proud. And so would your father." Just then, Dr. Sinclair arrived, shaking the rain from his umbrella, concern written across his face. "Word is spreading. There's talk of an injunction. Ashford's people are nervous, and the Serious Fraud Office called the clinic. They want to meet you both in person." Charlotte felt her heart hammering, but she didn't shrink from it. "Let them come. We have the truth." Before the sisters could celebrate, Lucy's phone buzzed. an alert from the security cameras she'd installed at the Grange. Charlotte checked the feed and saw headlights sweeping across the drive. Another black SUV, this one idling at the edge of the property, engine running, no one stepping out. "Let's stay inside tonight," Eleanor murmured, voice steely. "If they want us, they'll have to come through the front door, and this time, the world is watching." That night, as the rain eased and silence settled, Charlotte lay in her childhood bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for trouble but feeling, for the first time, a quiet pride. Their evidence was safe, their courage proven, their enemies finally on the defensive. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but for tonight, she let herself rest, hope flickering in the dark like the promise of dawn. Dawn broke with a strange kind of quiet, a hush that made Charlotte's heart race with the promise of change or disaster. The storm had washed the fields clean, but there was a different electricity in the air. News was moving, and not just in hushed circles anymore. Inside Hawthorne Grange, Lucy was already up, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but focused and sharp as she checked her phone and laptop for responses. Eleanor watched the sisters from the kitchen table, a mug of tea cradled in her hands, her face marked with the strain of so many days under siege and so many decades carrying secrets. Charlotte glanced at the window, half expecting another black SUV to appear. But for now, the lane was empty. The only movement outside was the Exmoor pony, grazing at the edge of the orchard, tail flicking with every bird call. Charlotte envied the animal's calm, the way it seemed untouched by all that swirled around the house and its inhabitants. Lucy's phone pinged, a flood of notifications lighting up the screen. She inhaled sharply, then read aloud. "Rosa's forwarded everything. The National Library has archived our files. But listen to this." The Ordnance Survey replied. "They want access to our GPS-tagged photos and the historic maps for their own investigation. And the Serious Fraud Office wants an official statement with original evidence." Charlotte felt a surge of hope, cautious but undeniable. "That's it then. We've forced their hand." Roger appeared at the back door, hair damp, jacket spattered with mud. "Grant's been arrested," he said quietly. "Caught trying to remove something from the construction site after hours. Police picked him up before he could get away. He's already asking for a deal. Wants to talk about Ashford, Blythe, all of them." Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth. "If Grant talks, everything changes." Lucy was already typing out a response to the Ordnance Survey, attaching files, double-checking timestamps and GPS data. "I'm sending it all, everything. If Ashford or Blythe try to spin this, they'll be fighting official records and our evidence." Roger sat with them at the table, voice low. "You know what you're starting, right? These men, they don't go quietly. Grant's already named 2 officials who took bribes to ignore the boundary changes. I heard from the vicar that the council's gone into emergency session. People are scared." Charlotte nodded, every muscle in her body tense, but she refused to let fear take over. "So are we, but we're not backing down." It didn't take long for the next blow to land. Within hours, uniformed police arrived at the construction site, sealing it off with yellow tape. Sir Ashford's car was spotted leaving the village in a hurry, but reporters from the BBC and The Guardian had already begun circling. Councillor Blythe was seen shouting at a police officer in front of the town hall, red-faced and sweating, denying every allegation as the cameras rolled. That afternoon, the Serious Fraud Office arrived in the village, a procession of government cars and grave-faced investigators. They spoke to Charlotte and Lucy first, taking statements, copying files from their encrypted drives, examining Charlotte's camera and the drone footage. The atmosphere was intense but respectful. It was clear the investigators recognized the scope of what had happened. Roger, too, was questioned at length, his memory for old boundaries and council meetings finally given the weight it deserved. Grant, under police protection, gave his testimony. He detailed everything: how Ashford had orchestrated the shifting of the boundary stones, how Blythe had manipulated parish records, how the gatehouse fire was ordered to destroy the last physical evidence, and, worst of all, how Edmund's death was not an accident. According to Grant, Ashford had arranged for Edmund to be poisoned with digitalis, a heart medication, masking the murder as a natural heart attack. The revelation shook Charlotte to her core, confirming her deepest fears about her uncle's fate. Eleanor listened to the news in silence, her knuckles white as she gripped the arms of her chair. For a moment, Charlotte thought she might weep, but Eleanor simply drew a deep, ragged breath. "It's not over yet," she said. "They'll fight, but the truth is out." The next days unfolded in a whirlwind. The SFO froze Ashford's assets, seized council records, and ordered a full audit of all land sales for the last 20 years. Blythe was placed under arrest, his house searched, his reputation ruined before the local news cameras. The other men who had profited from the scheme began to scramble. Some disappeared, others tried to cut deals, but the documents Charlotte, Lucy, and Eleanor had preserved made denial impossible. The village buzzed with both fear and relief. Some neighbors were wary, not wanting to believe the old families were corrupt. Others brought food, quietly thanked Charlotte and her family, or offered their own stories about lost land and silent threats. Roger was a constant presence, his steadiness grounding them as the drama played out. Dr. Sinclair checked on Eleanor twice a day, fielding questions from government officials and the press, quietly making sure the clinic's records couldn't be tampered with. But the highest drama unfolded not in backrooms but in the open, as BBC cameras filmed investigators exhuming records from the council vault. Townspeople lining the lane for a glimpse of justice. Lucy watched live updates online, sometimes laughing with disbelief, sometimes nearly crying with relief. In a single tense evening, the SFO called the family to the council offices, now swarming with investigators. Eleanor, regal and unyielding, spoke directly to the chief investigator. "The story of this land is older than any of us. Let the truth be seen, and let it not be buried again." Charlotte and Lucy provided every last file, answered questions, identified faces in photographs, explained the significance of the boundary marker and every map. When it was over, the chief investigator said only, "You've done more than enough. Now it's our turn." The family returned to the Grange together, stepping into the dark with shoulders straight. That night, as rain returned and thunder rolled across the hills, Charlotte stood at her window and watched the Exmoor pony, bold and calm in the fields. The storm would pass, she thought. Truth had been set free, and the power that had weighed down the village for decades was finally breaking. For the first time, Charlotte felt she could breathe. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more reckonings, but tonight she allowed herself to hope, really hope, that justice might finally be done. That night, thunder rolled low and constant across the hills. The electricity in the air made even the curtains shudder. Charlotte lay wide awake in her room at Hawthorne Grange, every muscle tense as she waited for a new blow. Maybe a phone call, a car crunching on the gravel, or the flash of blue lights. Lucy slept lightly across the hall, her laptop left open on the nightstand, a spreadsheet of evidence glowing in the dark. Eleanor dozed in her armchair, clutching the latest printed photographs to her chest, as if holding on to memory itself. Around midnight, the first warning came from Roger. He phoned, voice tight and urgent. "Charlotte, it started. I saw Ashford's men heading to the old gatehouse with fuel cans. I called the fire brigade, but you have to get there. If there's anything you can save." Charlotte didn't hesitate. She shook Lucy awake, and the two sisters rushed to the kitchen. Rain battered the windows as they grabbed raincoats and flashlights. Eleanor rose slowly, her face set in lines of both fear and resolve. "I'm coming with you." They drove through sheets of rain, the lane to the gatehouse a river of mud and shadows. As they neared the ruins, orange light danced against the clouds. Already the roof was in flames, the ancient timbers crackling and hissing, the air thick with the stench of smoke and burning paper. They could hear the wail of sirens far off, but Charlotte knew it would be too late for most of what was inside. Ashford's men, two of them, faces hidden by hoods, stood by their van at the far side of the field. One of them hurled a bottle into the fire, glass shattering with a sound that seemed to cut through the storm. The sisters crouched behind the hedgerow, shielding Eleanor from the heat and the sight. Charlotte's mind raced. The negatives. Eleanor, where were the boxes? Eleanor pointed with a trembling finger. Under the old workbench. If the fire hasn't reached the back room, there's a chance. Lucy hesitated, but Charlotte was already moving, teeth clenched against the heat. She sprinted to the side door, the metal handle scalding her palm, and shouldered her way inside. The smoke was choking, the air shimmering with heat, but she could see the workbench's outline through the haze. Dropping to her knees, she groped under the bench, coughing until her hand closed on the splintered edge of a wooden box. She grabbed it and ran, tripping over a fallen beam, lungs burning. Outside, Lucy and Eleanor reached for her, hauling her to safety just as a support collapsed behind them. The three of them stumbled away from the building, rain streaming down their faces, eyes stinging from smoke and tears. Roger appeared beside them, wild-eyed but smiling, clutching another box under his arm. "I got in from the back," he gasped. "Saved some, not all, but enough, I think." The four of them watched as the rest of the gatehouse crumbled, fire licking the sky, the old photographs and ledgers and letters turning to ash. By the time the fire brigade arrived, there was nothing left to do but douse the embers and check the perimeter. Ashford's men were gone, vanishing into the night just ahead of the sirens. For Eleanor, the loss was palpable. She sank to her knees in the wet grass, the boxes clutched to her chest, staring at the ruins with hollow eyes. Charlotte knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "It's not all lost," she whispered. "We saved enough. The digital files are safe. We made copies. The world will know." Eleanor nodded, tears streaking her smoke-stained cheeks. "It's not just the evidence. It's the memories. That was my life in there. My father's hands, my mother's voice, the faces of people who never got their story told." Lucy joined them, kneeling in the mud. "We can tell it now, Mom. We can show everyone what they tried to erase. And we can tell them you never gave up." Back at the clinic, they worked through the rest of the night, cataloging what they'd saved. Negatives, a few old prints, some of the earliest land surveys, photographs of boundary stones before they were moved. Lucy scanned and uploaded every image, updating Rosa and the National Library. Dr. Sinclair checked them all for burns and smoke inhalation, his worry obvious, but he couldn't hide his pride. By dawn, the village buzzed with news of the fire. Rumors spread. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered about Ashford's rage and the desperate lengths he would go to. Police cars patrolled the lanes, but Charlotte knew the real damage had already been done, and not just to the building. Word was out. Journalists started arriving, drawn by the flames and the history they threatened to erase. The community gathered at the smoldering ruins, some in tears, others angry, all united in the shock of what had happened. Charlotte and Eleanor stood side by side, facing reporters and neighbors. Eleanor spoke first, voice unsteady but strong. This wasn't just an old building. This was our memory, our proof, and someone tried to burn it away. But we have copies. We have witnesses. You can't destroy the truth. Not with fire, not with threats. Applause rippled through the crowd. Lucy stepped forward, holding up a USB drive. Everything we saved, everything we lost, will be shared with the world. Ashford and his men can't erase what's been seen. This isn't just our story, it's yours too. It belongs to everyone who's ever been silenced or stolen from. That night, as they returned to the Grange, Charlotte watched the smoke drifting over the fields. The pain of loss was sharp, but so was the pride. They had lost something irreplaceable, but their courage and their proof remained. Scattered, digitized, multiplying in 1,000 places. Even in ruins, the story would stand. Justice was coming, and this time, there would be no more burning away the truth. Inside the house, Charlotte fell asleep holding her mother's hand, soot on her fingers, hope finally outweighing fear. Somewhere outside, the Exmoor pony stamped the wet grass, dawn breaking behind it, as if signaling a new day for all who had fought to keep the past from being erased. The ruins of the gatehouse still smoldered 2 days after the fire, a blackened skeleton against the sky, the charred beams pointing accusingly at the clouds. Rain came and went, washing ashes into the grass. Hawthorne Grange buzzed with visitors, villagers dropping off casseroles, local reporters with microphones and cameras, children running up the drive to glimpse the famous sisters who had stood up to the powerful. Some neighbors arrived in silence, bearing plates of scones or armfuls of wildflowers, and left with quiet nods of gratitude or regret. The pain of loss hung heavy in the air, but something new had begun to take root, an energy that came not from secrets and fear, but from the stubborn hope that justice could finally win. Charlotte spent her days giving statements to the Serious Fraud Office and the police, walking the boundaries with Ordnance Survey inspectors, guiding conservationists through the mud and brambles. Every authority now seemed to want her opinion, her recollection, her files. Lucy handled most of the digital traffic, fielding emails from Rosa, the National Library, the press, the SFO, even an academic from Oxford who wanted to write a paper on land rights and the resilience of rural memory. Eleanor was the village's touchstone, her stories anchoring the interviews, her fierce pride holding the line when the questions grew personal. The inquiry moved quickly, as if the authorities were anxious to finish the job in the bright glare of the world's attention. The courtroom was packed for the public hearing, a makeshift bench in the village hall, filled with officials, witnesses, and so many villagers that they spilled out the doors and into the lane. Charlotte took her place at the front with Lucy and Eleanor, Roger at their side, their hands cold but steady. Sir Ashford arrived in a dark suit, his eyes sunken and defiant, flanked by his lawyers. Councillor Blythe came in looking smaller than Charlotte remembered, pale and twitchy, eyes darting at every camera flash. A hush fell as evidence was presented. High-resolution photographs of the original 1898 boundary marker, video of the drone flight across the construction site, time-stamped uploads, witness statements from Roger, from other villagers who'd been bullied or quietly cheated out of their land. The records of missing or doctored parish maps, the testimony of Grant, his voice flat and resigned as he recounted how he had been paid, threatened, and finally ordered to poison Edmund. Charlotte sat rigid as the tribunal reviewed her grandfather's diary, her father's final letters, the medical reports showing traces of digitalis in Edmund's body. Lucy explained the backups, the chain of custody, how no file or document could have been faked or altered. Eleanor described what the land had meant, how losing it had wounded the village, how silence had been forced on so many, and how hope returned only when people stood together. The air grew thick with emotion as old wounds were aired in public at last, each story adding weight to the final judgment. The verdict came at dusk. The judge, her robe splattered from the rain, read the decision aloud. The 1898 boundary marker was legal and binding. The court recognized the fraudulent nature of all subsequent changes, the theft of Eastmere Common, and the culpability of Sir Ashford and Blythe in both conspiracy and cover-up. The land was to be restored to the community immediately. Sir Ashford was remanded to custody, facing charges of fraud, conspiracy, and manslaughter. Councillor Blythe would be tried for corruption and perjury. The village would elect a new council, this time with outside oversight to ensure fairness and transparency. The room exploded in applause and tears. Neighbors hugged Charlotte and Lucy, some sobbing, others just repeating thank you again and again. Roger, usually so reserved, kissed Eleanor's hand and wiped his eyes. Lucy was swept into a knot of volunteers eager to help with restoration and press interviews. For a long moment, Charlotte stood still, absorbing the sound and the joy and the stunned silence that came after, as if the whole village had been holding its breath for years and could finally breathe again. In the days that followed, a new kind of work began. Conservationists returned to map wildflowers and waterways to protect what remained of the original common. The ruined gatehouse was fenced off, a temporary memorial hung with photos and ribbons. Plans were drawn up for a small heritage center, part museum, part archive, part community hub, built on the site. Using Eleanor's photographs and the history saved in those frantic days and nights. The Grange itself became a center of activity, volunteers sorting files, scanning the rescued negatives, children learning about surveying and history. Lucy coordinated social media campaigns and fielded requests from news crews. Charlotte was interviewed for radio and TV, her words careful but fierce. This was never just about our family. It was about every family who has ever lost their voice. Now no one is invisible. Yet there was reckoning, too. The inquiry exposed more than fraud. Stories of broken friendships, years of resentment, families divided by greed or shame. Some villagers struggled to accept that their own relatives had helped Ashford and Blythe, if only by looking away. There were heated meetings, honest apologies, awkward reconciliations. For all its joy, justice was not a neat victory. It was a process, slow and sometimes painful, but honest at last. Through it all, Charlotte felt her own wounds begin to close. There was still sorrow for what was lost. The photographs burned, the letters never found, the years spent apart. But as she walked the restored Eastmere Common with Lucy and Eleanor, Roger at their side, she saw children running where fences had stood, neighbors planting trees, the Exmoor pony grazing undisturbed. Hawthorne Grange felt lighter, no longer a fortress or a prison but a home, open to laughter and visitors and future plans. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, The villagers gathered for a bonfire in the newly returned common. Eleanor spoke, her voice ringing out strong. "Land is memory," she said. "It's our promise to those who came before and those who will come after. We can only honor it by remembering and by telling the truth, even when it hurts." Charlotte squeezed her mother's hand. Lucy took a photograph. The community gathered, faces lit by firelight, the smoke curling into the dark. In that moment, Charlotte knew the story was not just about loss or even about justice. It was about belonging and the hard work of reclaiming what matters. The night ended with laughter, music, a promise that the days of silence were over. As the embers faded, Charlotte glanced across the common to where the Exmoor pony stood silhouetted against the stars, a living emblem of all that had survived. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, the work of rebuilding trust, the persistence needed to guard what was won. But for now, as dawn crept up behind the trees, Charlotte let herself rest, surrounded by the voices of her family and her village, at peace in a place where memory and hope could finally grow side by side. Summer dawn in the Cotswolds came golden and gentle, the kind of light that made the ruins of the old gatehouse almost beautiful. Vines climbing over charred stone, wildflowers threading the broken timbers. Charlotte stood by the window of Hawthorne Grange, camera in hand, watching the Exmoor pony grazing quietly beyond the fence, its coat dappled by the morning sun. It had been months since the trial, but the weight of those years, of secrets and suspicion, loss and stubborn hope, had finally started to lift. The land, once contested and bruised, had softened, green with new grass, laughter echoing again in the fields. There was peace, but there was also purpose, a sense that the story wasn't just over. It had finally found its true beginning. Inside the Grange, the energy was different than it had ever been in Charlotte's childhood. The front hall, once so heavy with old portraits and stricter rules, now rang with footsteps and bright voices. Conservationists catalogued wildflowers and lichens with local schoolchildren. Volunteers sorted and digitized photographs. Eleanor had become a local celebrity, sometimes bemused but mostly delighted by visitors who brought her shortbread or asked for stories about the bad old days and the fight for the common. Even Lucy, always more at home in the city, seemed settled now as she moved among the volunteers, checking logistics for the next phase of their project. That phase had a centerpiece, one that brought the whole family and the village together for a celebration that would echo for years to come. The Victoria and Albert Museum in London had agreed to host an exhibition, Boundaries and Memory, the Cotswold Legacy of Eleanor Cavendish. It would feature not just the famous rescued negatives, but the full story of the stolen land and its return to the people. Charlotte worked closely with curators, selecting prints, writing captions, ensuring every name was correct, every detail honest. Lucy coordinated press releases and social media, drawing attention to the story beyond the Cotswolds. Eleanor provided her own voice, recorded for the audio tour, her pride and humor undimmed by age. The opening day arrived with a sense of wonder and tension, as if the family was holding its breath. They rode into London together, Charlotte, Eleanor, Lucy, and Roger, taking the train through green fields that looked softer and kinder now. At the museum, the gallery was filled with people, journalists, art critics, old friends from the village, and strangers who had followed the headlines. Charlotte walked the length of the exhibition in awe. There were Eleanor's earliest photographs of farm laborers and village children, boundary stones mossy with age, landscapes before and after the battle for the land. The centerpiece was a wall-sized print of the original 1898 boundary marker, saved by Charlotte's camera and Lucy's quick thinking. Next to it was a small glass case holding the battered flash drive and the scorched negatives rescued from the fire, a testament to what had been risked and what had been saved. Eleanor spoke at the opening, her voice steady and clear. Photography taught me to bear witness, but it was my family and my community who taught me that what matters most is not just what you see, but what you refuse to look away from. The truth is rarely easy, and justice never simple. But memory is a form of justice. Today, this story belongs to all of us. The applause was thunderous. Charlotte found herself blinking back tears, holding Lucy's hand. For the first time, she felt not only pride, but relief. The fight had not been for nothing. Their scars meant something. The evidence could never be burned away again, not with so many eyes to see it. After the exhibition, the family returned to Hawthorne Grange. Now it was Charlotte's turn to lead. With the compensation funds secured from the court's ruling, and with grants from heritage organizations, she began converting part of the Grange into a center for documentary photography and rural history. The old library became an archive, the dining hall a classroom for local students and visiting scholars. Lucy managed a project for rural youth to record oral histories and digitize family photographs, building a living memory bank for future generations. Eleanor, as honorary director, gave weekly talks and mentored young photographers, sometimes chiding them for forgetting the power of good light and a strong back. As the months passed, the pain of loss was never truly erased. There were still moments when Charlotte felt the ache of her father's absence, or the sting of all those years she and Lucy spent apart, living separate lives, letting pride and guilt build walls between them. But as each day brought new visitors, new stories, and new friendships, the wounds of the past slowly became a foundation for something stronger. There were reunions, too, some surprising. The new village council, elected in a flurry of hope and accountability, asked Eleanor to serve as honorary chairwoman. Roger, once content to live in the shadow of the big houses, was persuaded to run community workshops on landscape restoration and local folklore. Lucy, who once could not wait to leave, found herself as a mentor for teens from all over the region, helping them tell stories of their own through images and words. The fields of Eastmere Common were no longer locked behind silent fences or threatened by diggers. They became the setting for community festivals, restoration projects, and annual exhibitions of student photography. Tourists came, but always with respect, guided by locals who had learned the hard way what it meant to lose and reclaim a piece of heritage. The Exmoor pony, now famous in countless photographs, was cared for by the children who had grown up listening to Charlotte's story. More than once, Charlotte caught a glimpse of the animal standing quietly at dawn, like a promise. Memory and hope refusing to vanish, no matter what storms might come. One evening, as autumn painted the hills with fire and the Grange buzzed with visitors, Charlotte and Lucy sat with Eleanor in the study, sorting through a new batch of letters and photographs sent by villagers wanting to add to the growing archive. Charlotte looked up from a faded snapshot and caught her mother's eye. "Do you ever regret it, Mom?" she asked quietly. "All the fighting? All the pain?" Eleanor smiled, her hand covering Charlotte's. "Never. If I'd done nothing, there would be no story to tell. And you, neither of you, would be who you are." Lucy added, her tone gentler than Charlotte remembered. "We can't fix the past, but we can make sure it isn't lost again." Charlotte nodded, the simple truth settling over her like a blessing. The past wasn't perfect, and neither was the future. but they had found a way to belong again, to each other, to the land, to the tangled and beautiful memory that was home. As the evening ended and the visitors drifted away, Charlotte slipped outside. The sky was clear, stars sharp above the sleeping village. Across the dew-bright grass, the Exmoor pony stood by the old boundary stone, as if standing guard over the land that had been lost and found so many times. Charlotte walked toward it, her camera at her side, and for a moment she simply stood in the hush, letting her heart settle. She thought of all she had learned, that when people defend the truth with evidence and courage, even the strongest privilege can be shaken. That documentary photography and investigative reporting remain vital weapons against corruption. That family and community are where the fight for justice begins, and where, when it's done right, it always returns. As the first light of dawn touched the hills, Charlotte raised her camera and took one last photograph. The pony, the grass, the stone, the morning. A portrait of resilience, of memory, and of the promise that some stories, once told, can never be lost again.